Hello, and thank you for tuning in to another Trip Hacks DC live stream, special spring 2021 live stream. My name is Rob. I am the founder of Trip Hacks DC Tours, and I welcome you to Capitol Hill today. So if you are tuned in live, welcome, hello, good afternoon. It's just past noon here in Washington, D.C. today. And if you're watching this on the replay, after you're done watching the video, leave me a comment down underneath and let me know what you are most looking forward to this year, 2021, especially if you're planning on visiting here in Washington, D.C. So if you are tuned in live, please go ahead and say hello in the live chat and let me know where in the world you are tuned in from. So I'm going to go ahead and flip the camera around here, starting today's walk here at the Library of Congress, the Jefferson Building, one of my personal favorite buildings in the entire city. Many people say that this is the most beautiful building in all of Washington, D.C. It's honestly a bit hard to disagree with that assessment, especially if you have ever been inside. And I'm just going to go ahead and say good morning and welcome to everyone who's tuned in. Simon Davey from Reading, England has joined again and says, always looks forward to these live streams. And Angeline says it's overcast in Indianapolis here today. It is overcast here in Washington, D.C. as well. Peter Wisman coming to D.C. tonight. Can't wait. Enjoy your trip, Peter. And Peter Pan is tuned in as well. Hello, Peter Pan. Now, I wanted to start up here today to give a brief update on the Capitol grounds. Folks probably know that the Capitol was surrounded by a very large fence for about 2 months. If you tuned into my snow day live stream back in, I believe it was back in February, you saw that on the other side of the Capitol, I was only able to get up to 3rd Street before we had to turn and go all the way up towards the Library of Congress before making it back around. So the huge perimeter fence is gone, thank goodness. It was quite awful for those of us who live here and, of course, for us tour guides here. It has been, I guess you could say, replaced by a smaller interior fence. And this fence basically makes a rectangle around the Capitol grounds. So, as you can see on the other side of 1st Street, you cannot get any closer than that, which means that you cannot get into the Capitol Visitor Center either, because this little ramp right over there is the ramp that you would take down to the Capitol Visitor Center door to get inside. So this is the current status of the Capitol, but I know a lot of folks are curious and so wanted to show to start. And yes, Simon says, love that building, spectacular on the inside. It is spectacular both on the inside and on the outside. The amount of detail that they put into the busts that you see up at the top of the building here, just really incredible. The video certainly will not do it justice, I am sure. And unfortunately, Library of Congress has been closed for over 1 year. It closed last March due to COVID, and it has remained closed since then. So, huge bummer, because Library of Congress is one of my personal favorites. And when folks ask me for a recommendation, I usually ask if this is on their agenda, and if it is not, I suggest that they add it to their agenda. Karen McGinn, good afternoon. Looking forward to the museums to be open, Library of Congress, Capitol Visitor Center, etc. And Gary Sorensen, tuned in from Wisconsin. Overcast and misting. Yes, Gary, it was misting here in Washington, D.C. this morning as well. And the reason why I chose to do today's live stream today on Saturday rather than on Sunday, which is more typically when I would do something on YouTube, is because the weather today, although not great, is probably going to be better than tomorrow. Peter Pan is from Ireland. And Bobby Planzer. I'm pretty well. How are you, Bobby? So we have approached the Neptune fountain, or the court of Neptune. This is one of the sites that people are quite surprised when they see, because they're not entirely sure what this has to do with much of anything. I think it's one of the coolest sites in all of Washington, D.C. with Neptune in the middle there, flanked by the tritons, the turtles, the water. I'm a big fan of any kind of water feature, and that's why it was such a bummer that the water was turned off here for so long, because this is just not the same without the water. Now, if you've been to Washington, D.C. before, in the chat, let me know if you've seen the Court of Neptune fountain before. I'm quite curious, and if you have seen it, what you thought about it. Because people's reactions to this, I find, often are just as interesting as the fountain itself. Simon says, it looks so strange with the fences up around the Capitol. I do agree with you, Simon. Having done tours here for many, many years, it's very sad and depressing to see the fencing up around the Capitol. Now, when they took down the giant fence a few weeks back, many people celebrated that because it was, I suppose, a small victory, but with this one still up, unfortunately makes the grounds almost completely inaccessible, and the visitor center as well. And Hiro tuned in from Japan, where it is 1:03 in the morning. So I can't tell you how appreciative I am, Hiro, that you stayed up all the way until 1:03 to join me here today.
Once we're done.
And Champ says, has been in the Library of Congress. It is beautiful. So there's technically 3 buildings that are part of the Library of Congress. The one I was just standing in front of is called the Jefferson Building, named after Thomas Jefferson, who has an interesting relationship to the Library of Congress. His personal library was sold to the government after the War of 1812 to help rebuild the Library of Congress. A lot of things going on there. Firstly, the original Library of Congress was over here, inside the Capitol building, and when the British came in 1814, they burned the Capitol, and by some accounts, they used the books in the Library of Congress as fuel to burn down the building. So the Library of Congress was destroyed, and Thomas Jefferson, in his later years, was quite destitute. He owed a lot of money to a lot of people, but he did have quite a few assets, including his personal library, which he was able to sell to the government to help recreate the Library of Congress. So there are 3 total buildings that are part of the Library of Congress: the Jefferson Building, the Madison Building, named after James Madison, and the Adams Building, named for John Adams. All founding fathers. Now, this building is the Supreme Court. Unfortunately, this is as close as we will get today. Another one of the most beautiful buildings in town, because it is made of bright white Italian marble. And it has not always been here. It opened in 1933, which means that for the majority of our country's history, the Supreme Court did not meet here. They also met mostly over here at the Capitol, although they did have a few other meeting locations over the years. So for being a co-equal branch of government, one of 3, it's somewhat odd that for all those years, the Supreme Court did not have their own building. Simon Davies says he has been to the Neptune fountain, and that it's always hard to interpret the fountains, especially when they're turned off. I agree. A fountain is more, kind of just becomes a statue when it's turned off. And if the water was a big part of the design, it can be hard to tell what is going on. Of course, I named today's live stream Capitol Hill Neighborhood Flowers, and so it would be wrong of me not to stop for at least a few of them. Nice little spot right here. The most frequent question I have gotten over the past week is, what about the cherry blossoms? I'm planning to come on insert date. Will they still be around? Now, the answer to that is, if you're talking about the world-famous Tidal Basin cherry blossoms, and you're asking if they will be in peak bloom, the answer to that is no. I was there about 2 weeks ago, I think it was 12 days ago, when they were in peak bloom, and peak bloom rarely lasts more than a week, so you can do the math. and realize that you have missed peak bloom. But I always tell people, just because you missed it doesn't mean you shouldn't come to Washington, D.C. at all, because there's always something in bloom. Doesn't mean it will be exactly what you saw in the photos, but it will be something, including this tree up here on the left. Champ says they are a Capitol Hill dweller and hate the fence so much. I have heard that from many of your neighbors, Champ. And Bobby asks, will I go to the White House? No, I will not. Too far away. So today's walk will be around the Capitol Hill neighborhood. I will plan to end around Lincoln Park, which is in the opposite direction of the White House. All right, so if you are just tuned in, go ahead and leave a live chat and let me know where you're tuned in from and say hello so that I can say hello and good afternoon to you, or good morning, depending on what part of the world you're living in. Hiro, what are the cherry blossoms in Japan like right now, where you live? I'm quite curious. There have been some news stories about how the world-famous cherry blossoms in Japan hit their peak bloom earlier than ever. All right, so not every tree in Washington, D.C. is the world-famous Washington, D.C. Yoshino cherry tree. Doesn't mean there aren't other nice-looking ones. Doesn't mean you can't find a nice bloom, whether you come later in April or in May. Michael Murphy, hello from Philly. Thank you for tuning in. Another very historic city that I like quite a bit, Philadelphia. Haven't been in quite a while, which means it's time for a trip. All right, Champ is 2 blocks away from me. Yes, I will be venturing into the neighborhood where lots of people live today. And Eddie Saunders, good to see you. Again, minus the barriers, DC is looking remarkable right now. Glad you think so, Eddie. It's good to hear that. This building across the way here is the Florida House. One of the few TikToks that I've made that went viral was about the Florida House. It's nicknamed the Embassy of Florida, although it is officially not an embassy of anything. It's more like a visitor center. And it really riled up people who live in Florida when they saw that TikTok. Many of them did not know that Florida House exists. And it also led to a rather interesting discussion about whether Texas has an embassy in Washington, D.C. So before I reveal the answer, in the chat, guess whether you think Texas has an embassy in Washington, D.C. Viri, hopefully I pronounced that correctly, is from Florida. Hello, good morning. And Hiro says the cherry blossoms have fallen in my area. Sad face. I know the feeling, Hiro. The cherry blossoms in my area have mostly fallen as well. So on today's route, I'm making my way first to Stanton Park, and then I will walk to the east and head over to Lincoln Park. Now, the original idea for this live stream, and the reason I scheduled it for today, is because there is an official National Cherry Blossom Festival event called the Petal Porch Parade. And people who live here were encouraged to decorate their homes, their windows, their porches in pink decorations. And there is a map on the National Cherry Blossom official website with every petal porch that was registered. And today and tomorrow they're driving a caravan of Toyota SUVs around, I think is what I heard. And that's going to be the parade. So my idea initially was to take you over to this area, which has one of the highest concentrations of petal porches, at least according to that map. But I have to admit, I scoped it out the other day, and while they're all very fun, they're not quite as spectacular or remarkable as I had initially imagined in my head. So I needed to broaden the theme of today's walk, but we'll still see some of them nonetheless. Another one of these beautiful pink trees over here on Constitution Avenue. It may not be the Yoshino variety, but I have to say it looks quite nice. All right, Eddie Saunders is going to be coming to DC for the first time in 18 months this May. Look forward to having you visit Eddie. And we've got some guesses on the Texas Embassy. Evan Cortez says yes, because Texas was a sovereign nation for 10 years. And Simon says there's a restaurant in London called the Texas Embassy. Many people think it's an actual embassy. And Ride and Shine Bicycling. Yes, there is a Texas Embassy. Very strange. Why? Well, I'm not stating that, Ride and Shine Bicycling, but I am curious if people think there's one, because one thing I discovered from that TikTok I made about the Florida house is that many people said there was. That's the beauty of TikTok, is that you put something up there, and no matter what you say, you get a ton of people in the comments calling you an idiot. So when I made a video about Florida House, everybody wanted to know, what about the Texas Embassy? And Simon Davey will be back as soon as international travel is allowed from the UK. So that is another question that I have gotten somewhat frequently lately, is about international travel, and unfortunately, I do not have any insight into that, because there are multiple countries involved, and I'm not keeping up with the rules in all of them. Okay, so the answer to the question about the Texas Embassy is that there is not a Texas Embassy in Washington, D.C. Evan Cortez is on the right track. When Texas was a sovereign nation, when it was the Republic of Texas, there was a legation, a diplomatic legation in Washington, D.C. And you probably never even heard that term, legation, before. A legation and an embassy are quite similar, except that an embassy has an ambassador and a legation does not. And there's no rule that says that a diplomatic mission has to have its own building either. It's very convenient, for many reasons, for each country to have their own building for their embassy. But with the Texas legation, they basically just called whatever boarding house the representative from Texas was living in the legation. So it moved pretty much every year. And there is no single building that you can go to nowadays and point to and say that was it. Now, I believe that's different in London, where there was a building that still exists, and there is a plaque on the outside that you can visit. And Champ is on Constitution, which is where I just was. So this park up ahead, where I am traveling, is called Stanton Park. This one is named after the Secretary of War back during the Civil War, Edwin Stanton. And as you'll see once I get inside, the trees have almost completely switched over to leafy green, which is completely different than how they looked 2 weeks ago when I was over here recording. So exactly 2 weeks ago, on that Saturday, I came over here to Stanton Park, and as luck would have it, the cherry trees in this park were in perfect peak bloom. So I recorded a walk around. It's about 8 minutes long, and you can see that right here on the YouTube channel if you are curious about what this park looks like in perfect peak bloom. And Simon has some information about the spot in London that I was referencing. The old Texas legation is now a restaurant and a business center. which doesn't surprise me too much. So 2 weeks ago, this little hallway right here was completely bright white with the cherry trees in bloom. And today, as you can see, they have almost completely switched over to leafy green, which is what happens after the cherry blossoms go out of bloom. And there's very few left, but if I point down at the ground here, you'll be able to see there are still a few of these pink petals hanging on down here. So when a cherry tree is in bloom, it looks spectacular. And as long as the weather is okay, it can stay at peak bloom for up to about 2 weeks. But in Washington, D.C., the weather is never good enough to keep them in peak bloom for more than 1 week at best. So eventually there will be a windy day or there will be a rainy day, and all of the cherry blossom petals will fall to the ground. Okay, now, on the way in I said that this is a park called Stanton Park, named after Edwin Stanton. So you would be logical to guess that this guy here on the horse is the man who the park is named for, Edwin Stanton, and that would be a perfectly valid guess. But this guy on the horse is actually Nathaniel Greene, a different military guy from the same time period. So it's always interesting to me in DC when you find a little park like this. You kind of just learn the name of the park and a lot of times don't really ask any questions about who is this actually named for or why. And in some cases the story can be quite interesting. In others it can be a bit of a snooze. But I happen to think that this one is a pretty decent story. Okay, so I'm making my way up to D Street, as in dog, northeast, as I happen to know from the official National Cherry Blossom Festival Petal Porch Parade map that there are quite a few of them up there. And once we get to see some of them, you can give me your opinion about how you think they turned out. So the National Cherry Blossom Festival, they had to really rethink their entire festival this year because their big signature events are all big in-person events. The opening ceremony, show, the kite festival, the parade. These are all big events that would generally draw a crowd, which is not what they wanted to do this year. So some of the events went online, like the opening ceremonies, and yesterday they had another show hosted by Drew Barrymore, part of the festival. But for others, they have kind of rethought it entirely. So this year in New Orleans for Mardi Gras, instead of having the big parades that they normally have, people decorated their houses, their porches, and made their house into a float, since there weren't any of the traditional floats. And my hunch is that National Cherry Blossom Festival borrowed that idea from our friends in New Orleans. Simply Jocelyn, thank you for tuning in, my friend. Good to see you. I saw that you are recording a new round of cocktail tutorials. So if you are someone who likes to make cocktails at home, check out Simply Jocelyn. And she has reminded everyone to give this video a thumbs up. If you are tuned in live, and enjoying the neighborhood walk. This is going to be the last of these live streams, so I think this is the 4th weekend in a row that I am out here. And we'll probably go back to the regular pre-recorded tips videos after this. So this is the street that I happen to know have quite a few of these decorated porches. A lot of people use the petals that go on the railing. I quite like that. And someone told me that Amazon also sells a cherry blossom string light set, I guess similar to your Christmas lights, but made out of cherry blossoms. And every house that is participating was provided with this little sign that you could put out, and so that everyone would know you are a participant in the porch parade. And Isabel, greetings from Puerto Rico. Isabel was just on one of my tours of the monuments, so it's good to see you again, Isabel. I'm glad to see that you made it safely home to Puerto Rico. And Eddie Saunders, thank you for the super chat, my friend. Happy to do this Saturday afternoon tour. So I think this year for the Petal Porches, it was kind of a last minute thing. And so if you look at the map, a lot of the porches are quite spread out, quite spaced out, because people got word that it was happening, and they got their decorations, like these, and they put them up at their home. But there wasn't a ton of coordination amongst the neighbors, unless you happen to live on a street with someone who really took charge. I have to say I quite like this one. This one is very much of the Japanese theme here, and they do have lights, which you can't see because it's light out, but they have the icicle lights that you see during Christmas time, except instead of being white, they are pink. So that one is certainly one of the good nighttime spots. And yes, Simon says, looking forward to doing a real-life tour, which you can check out on the website, triphacksdc.com. I'm not sure if that made it through, Simon, because the spam filter does kick out any links that you post. So in case that didn't make it through, you can check out triphacksdc.com. Although I think I did make you a moderator, Simon, which means that you can post links. And Dale says, it's so tempting because international travel may be out for this year, so domestic will be in. I think that's right, Dale. I think international is going to be very challenging this year because you don't know what any other country is going to do necessarily. And Eddie says the live streams are great. Well, I'm glad you think so, Eddie. I have enjoyed coming out here. I think this is the 4th weekend in a row that I've done the live stream. But that means it's also the 4th weekend in a row that I haven't had any kind of tips video, which is going to be important because there are a lot of updates and things that I need to get out for the 2021 season. And good, the link came through for everybody. Okay, still on D Street. D as in dog, in case you're following along. Champ, I know you're on Constitution over here. And making my way through the neighborhood, down to the east. I always get a little bit turned around at that intersection I just crossed on Maryland Avenue, because you have to cross twice to stay on the same street. Andy Felicati, hello, my friend. I am near your neighborhood. I think I know where that is. Andy, because you had a viral TikTok of a building falling down, if I recall. And I happen to know where that was. Yes, Jacob's Coffee Shop incoming. One thing people ask me all the time is where the hidden gems are, and here's one of them. So it's called Jacob's Coffee House, but I would describe it not at all like a Starbucks. It's more like a diner where you would go in and have your coffee and your breakfast and chat with the folks working behind the counter. I showed a similar type of establishment in the snow day video. I believe we stopped at Pete's Diner at the very end. If anyone remembers that, let me know. But this is a dying breed, the old-fashioned diner. You really don't get places like this anymore. And unfortunately, I really was afraid COVID would do them all in, because it's already challenging enough to run a restaurant. It's doubly challenging to run a restaurant that only serves breakfast and closes at 3 o'clock every day. And then when you have to switch to takeout only, things get real tough. So, some info on the window. If you live in the neighborhood, go on the website or give them a ring to order. And Andy says he loves the bubble tea, and they have it. I'm more of a coffee guy than a tea guy myself, but bubble tea sounds quite delicious to me right now. And Andy says the BBQ place around the corner is pretty good too. We're gonna set off a war in the chat, Andy, if we start talking barbecue. People are very particular about their barbecue. Let's see, IJ Quest. Hello to all. Where are you tuned in from, IJ? And another good place, Jimmy T's, is around on East Capitol Street. East Capitol and 5th, I believe, Andy. So I am currently on D, as in dog, approaching 9th, northeast. So Jimmy T's is in this direction. Pete's Diner is also in that direction as well. And yes, Simon says, I love independent coffee houses and restaurants, doing my best to support those near me. So I just re-edited the podcast episode, Trip Hacks DC podcast episode, that's going to go live on May 1st. Sorry, I lost track of what month we're in now. And I re-recorded the epilogue because there are a lot of tours in Washington, D.C., and you really have your choice between picking a tour from a national chain or one from a local, small little tour company like Trip Hacks DC. And in the past, I, understood why you would pick one or the other, but if you are really about sustainable tourism and supporting the communities you're visiting, I really think you've got to pick the small little local guy this year rather than the big national chain. So that will be up on May the 1st once I finish re-editing it. Kind of into this porch, a little different than the ones we saw back before. And this one also has the windows fully decorated as well, which not all of the previous porches did. And $1.99 from Andy for vibes. Thank you, my friend. Much appreciated. I will get a small iced coffee afterwards to celebrate. And Simon's asking a tough question. If I only could eat at one BBQ place in DC, which should it be? I'm going to upset everyone, no matter which one I give, because people are very particular about their barbecue. My personal favorite would probably be the Federalist Pig, if I had to give only one. And that is with me saying I have not eaten at all of them, so there are many good ones, I'm sure, but that is the one that I would personally say is my favorite. And Andy, haven't heard the podcast yet. Well, there's over 20 episodes, Andy, so that will keep you busy for quite a while. And 10 pounds from Simon Davey. Thank you, my friend. Glad you are able to tune in to these live streams. the last few weekends. And this isn't going to be the end of the live stream, just in case anyone was concerned about that. But for the past month, I have been doing these special spring Trip DC live streams. And kind of taking a break from my tips and updates videos. But I need to get back to those because there are some very important updates coming up that everyone will need to know about if they're planning on traveling. So I'll need to get that info out. There's also some things that have changed with regard to Metro, with regard to transportation, Capital Bike Share. There's just a lot of stuff that is going to be a little different than if you visited in the past. Which means that no matter where you travel, it's actually really important to make sure that the travel content that you're consuming to plan your trip is up to date. Because even some things that are a few years old are already going to be out of date. And Hero says the decorations are so good. Well, I'm glad you think so. I think next year, if they continue to do this, they will be way better. Because I think most people didn't have a lot of time to plan it out this year. But I think once the National Cherry Blossom Festival posts the best ones, people will get a lot more inspiration. And if they do it again next year, I think the decorations, the porch decorations, will be A+, even better than this year. Okay, so if you missed it, I turned onto 11th Street over here. We've got another one of these puffy pink trees coming up ahead. This tree, unfortunately, mostly completed. It's blossoming. But it does have all of the petals still hanging out around the bottom of the tree. So you can see what that looks like when it happens. Last Sunday I was out around here, about a mile away, and one of the cherry trees that I was near, all the petals were blowing off. It looked like it was snowing. So that was pretty cool. And one of the coolest things about walking around Capitol Hill is that the houses all look super cool. And a big part of that is the fact that even though many of them look similar, they're all totally unique. Built at different time periods, built by different people. And many of them, not all of them, but many of them are the classic Washington, D.C. row house style, which means that you share your walls with the neighbor. Not many cities have row houses. Baltimore is the one that is the most architecturally similar with its row houses. Eddie Saunders says cherry blossoms next year will be amazing. I sure hope so, Eddie. One thing I will say about this year's blossoms is that because National Park Service did so much to discourage people from going, many people didn't go, which meant that for folks who did, it was a much less crowded experience than in the past. So I was down at the tidal basin on March 29th and was quite surprised. There were plenty of people, don't get me wrong. I don't want to make it sound like it was deserted. But if you've ever been there during a peak bloom before, if you watch that video, you'll know that it was nothing compared to what it could have been. And Simon says row houses, which are known as terraced houses, are very popular here in the UK. Yeah, I suppose they're probably much more European than other styles. There are a few cities in the US where you can find them. Everyone knows of the famous row houses in San Francisco. If you've ever gotten a postcard in San Francisco, chances are you saw that. And thank you, Andy, for posting my cherry blossom video for reference. And everyone should also go and watch Andy's video about photographing the cherry blossoms. You should post that link too, Andy. I think you can do it since you're a moderator. Turns out Andy and I were there at the exact same moment, but did not bump into each other. I even looked for myself in your video, Andy, and I did not see me. So we were just in slightly different places at the same time. This is always a good video to a good neighborhood to walk through on a nice spring day. Much less crowded than on the National Mall. So far, I believe I've had much better signal than I always do on the National Mall. And Andy is going through my video now to look for himself, because there is, and he has a lot of GoPro footage. I assume that was a GoPro strapped to your front, Andy, as you are also holding a camera. Not something I would be able to do very eloquently. This tree is looking pretty nice, although it is at the end of its blossoming. So we're only about a block and a half away from Lincoln Park. Named after the 16th president, Abraham Lincoln. And if you haven't heard the podcast yet, the Trip Hacks DC podcast, I'm just going to go ahead and shamelessly plug it right now. There's over 20 episodes at this point, and one of my favorite episodes is the one about Abraham Lincoln historic sites in Washington, D.C., because we all know about the Lincoln Memorial, and you have to go to the Lincoln Memorial, no doubt about that. But there are lots of other Lincoln historic sites that you may or may not know about, and if you're a Lincoln history buff, then you've got to see them. So, triphacksdc.com/podcast. I think that episode was probably about a year and a half ago. But well worth it if you're into the Lincoln historic sites. And yes, Andy says straps a GoPro on the chest. Comes out surprisingly well. That's what I suspected when I watched your video, Andy. And Suman says they were here last weekend. Went through all the must-see places. And Circulator bus was free. That's good news to hear. Only spend money on food and water. So I did a $20 challenge last summer, 2 summers ago, lost track of time, where I challenged myself to try to do a bunch of fun stuff and not spend more than one $20 bill for the entire day. And that's totally possible to do in DC because many of the sites are completely free. Unfortunately, right now, at this moment, many of the completely free sites that I took advantage of in that video are still closed. But if you're looking for inspiration on how to come to DC and leave with most of your money, highly recommend checking out that video. Yes, Chad says his cottage is cool. We talk about Lincoln's cottage in the podcast episode. So Abraham Lincoln lived in Washington, D.C. in the 1800s at the White House. In the 1800s, Washington, D.C. was not a pleasant place to live. Air conditioning had not been invented yet. That's the key thing. And without air conditioning, this is a miserable, miserable place in the summer. So the cottage, which is only a few miles uptown from the White House, was, I guess, much cooler and more pleasant than the White House. So Lincoln spent his time in the summer up there. All right, all the dogs are speaking at the moment. Sounds like they've calmed down. And Hero wants to come to DC and had a plan to visit in September, but it will be postponed. Are you talking about September 2021? That is quite a bummer, Hero. International travel is going to be extremely tricky in 2021, I'm afraid. We're all sorting out what's going to happen with the Olympics. That's a mess. Every country has its own rules and restrictions, quite difficult to navigate. And Andy says, growing up here spoiled me. I always assumed museums in all cities were free. I've heard that before, Andy. And it's quite a shock when you go to the Louvre or any place like that and discover it's not free, nor is it even especially cheap. And Simon says his friend tried to replicate the $20 challenge but didn't factor in accommodation. Yeah, so I specifically said at the beginning I had to exclude accommodation because there's no way it would be possible if you had to include your accommodation and all your meals and activities. So it wasn't a true $20 challenge in that sense. It's also, if you exclude accommodation and you stay at a hotel that has an included breakfast, then you can save a bunch of money on breakfast and make that $20 stretch even farther. And Kristen says, miserable, try living in Southwest Florida in the summer. I'm sure it's miserable, but just like here, the AC makes it possible. And Eddie says, DC has some pretty tight requirements for visitors as well. So I will have an update video probably next weekend, Eddie, about the restrictions. Basically, at this point, if you are fully vaccinated, then you get a waiver from all of the travel restrictions. So that is a big deal. It means a lot of people will be able to come starting very soon, because I know a lot of people are close to being fully vaccinated. And let's see, we heard that maybe in all caps, the end of May for the travel ban for Europe will be lifted. Yes, can't speak to Europe. I have no idea what they are doing, but keep an eye on the news for updates. And here we have Mary McLeod Bethune, who I'm surely mispronouncing, and I apologize for that. I'm terrible at pronunciation. She was an educator. She was a civil rights leader. She was an advisor to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and that is why she is depicted here helping these children. This is a fairly recent addition to the park. It opened in 1974, and if you take a women's history tour in Washington, D.C., it may include this as one of the stops, as she is quite a fascinating woman. But I will leave it at that and let people discover her when they come to Washington, D.C. And Eddie Saunders just got a second shot and is all set. Great news, Eddie. So not sure how that's going to impact international, but for domestic, certainly will. So this is Lincoln Park, named after Abraham Lincoln. It is functionally a neighborhood park. Every weekend you come here and you see people who live nearby sitting on the grass, having a picnic, running around with their dog, strollers, kids, all that stuff. It is technically a National Park Service unit, so just like the National Mall, the National Park Service is in charge of emptying the trash cans, maintaining the grounds, all that stuff, which has led to some tension over the years, as they don't always do an amazing job. And just like every city, we have a parks department, just like in that show Parks and Rec. In the city government, there are folks who work on the parks, and many people think they could do a much better job of maintaining places like Lincoln Park. So there's always some tension between the locals and the feds when it comes to these spaces. And Andy, surely joking, said he thought Lincoln Park was named after the band. Very 90s reference there. Big smiley face from Eddie Saunders, to be traveling again soon. I know you're still waiting on me to figure out my tour schedule, Eddie, for May. I am still working on that. And don't worry, I'll make sure that you get first pick of date when the May schedule is ready. So as you can see, this is hardly the nicest lawn in the middle of the park here, if you could even call it that at all. But yes, if you are planning a trip to Washington, D.C. in May or June or any other time in 2020, make sure you are subscribed to the channel, because I will have quite a few update videos as things continue to change. I know it's hard to keep up with everything, but I will do my best to keep you up to date. Now, in that Lincoln History Sites podcast, my guest talked about this statue of Abraham Lincoln here. She said that it is not exactly the most enlightened statue of all time. It's called the Lincoln Emancipation statue, and you have Abraham Lincoln standing over a freed slave here. Now, this opened 11 years after Abraham Lincoln's assassination, and although the number is debated, some people believe that 25,000 people attended the dedication of this statue, including Frederick Douglass, the very well-known abolitionist. And according to some accounts, he wasn't exactly a huge fan of the statue back then, but not enough to stop it from happening. And Eddie says, excited to get back into DC. I'm sure many folks are excited to resume their travels. All right, and if you haven't already, if you're tuned in live or on the recording, make sure to give this video a thumbs up so that I know that you enjoyed spending an hour with me today. There will be more live streams in the future. I have an entire list of live streams to do, but if you have any ideas, suggestions, etc., leave a comment and let me know. And Janie Brown can't wait to come on a tour. Well, I look forward to having you hopefully soon, Janie. Thank you, Peter Pan, for the big double thumbs up. Very much appreciated. All right, so I hope that you have enjoyed the walk around the Capitol Hill neighborhood today. I know it was a bit overcast, but pretty nice day for a walk. And this will be my last live stream, spring live stream. I'll continue to do these throughout the year, so make sure you're subscribed to the channel if you enjoy these, so you always get updated when they are happening. Otherwise, beginning next weekend, I will continue to do the regular Washington, D.C. tips and travel hacks videos, which I think will be useful as things continue to change in the coming months. So I will bid you farewell. Thank you, everyone who tuned in live. Thanks for coming. Thank you for the super chats from all of my friends out there. Very much appreciated as always. And if you have any other comments, suggestions, etc., make sure to come back to this video if you're watching it live and leave me a comment on the actual video itself once it posts a little bit later. Otherwise, as I always say at the end of every video, enjoy your trip.